Welcome back to the GCSE Maths Pro YouTube channel. Today's video is the first part of looking at the topic of proportion, where we'll be looking at direct proportion specifically. The proportion topic is split up into 4 videos, so make sure to check out each one of these other 3 once you have watched today's. So before we jump into any questions, this is basically the most key part of the whole proportion topic. If anything, these are the 2 formulas you just need to memorize, okay? It is in the syllabus as proportion in terms of like ratio and proportion, but technically it is just algebra, right? We're just substituting, rearranging equations, solving equations, things like that. So this is our starting point. As you can see, I've put both direct and inverse proportion here. So make a note of both of these equations. So we've got here, if you have a question that says, and obviously I've used y and x, but they could be any letters in the question, right? It could be any letters. Y is directly proportional to x. Therefore, the formula I need is this, y equals kx, or in other words, k times x. Now, k most of the time just represents what we call a constant. It's just a number. We're going to find out what that number is depending on each individual question. So just remember it is k times x for direct proportion. For inverse proportions, we have here y is inversely proportional to x. We have y equals k over x. So it's kind of easy to remember one is times, one's divide. However, this one I do tend to kind of get mixed up and forget, okay, which letter is at the top and which is at the bottom. Remember, it's k at the top, x at the bottom. Obviously, inverse proportion, we will come back to that in the second video. We'll just be focusing on questions that use this first formula today in this direct proportion video. So direct proportion and inverse proportion, the questions can be laid out in different ways. We're going to start off by looking at this kind of table format, but really the steps are always the same thing, okay? So we've got here y is directly proportional to x. First of all, what does that even mean? Well, proportional just means there's a relationship between the 2 things. In this context, y and x, there's a relationship between y and x. Direct proportion, or being directly proportional, means, for example, if y increases, x would also increase. If y decreases, x will also decrease. So they're kind of going in the same direction, if that makes sense. This one, it just says complete the table. Okay, well, yeah, if you haven't seen this before, you're not going to know where to start. So our step 1. We're going to go by steps. Step 1 is always to figure out which formula do we need. So that previous page we just looked at, as I said, is our starting point. Because it says direct proportion, I'm going to use the direct proportion formula. And I'm going to write it, if let's say I know I've got x and y here again, but let's say if I had different letters, you just write the formula in the same order that they write the letters. So you see how y comes first in the sentence and then x. So in this case, I've got y equals k times x, y equals kx, as we saw in the previous page. That's my starting point. Okay, great, but yeah, well, where do we go from now? So what we have to do is, step 2 is always what we call find k, which is our constant, isn't it, the number. We need to find what number is this k. Well, you will always be given what I like to call a matching pair. In this case, the matching pair, as you can see, is, let's say, for example, they'll say when x is this, y is that. In this case, they've given it to us in the table. You see this column here. We know that when x is 9, y is 27. So that's our matching pair. What that means is we need to substitute in both of these into our formula. What we mean by substitute is replace, isn't it? So what I mean by that is y, instead of writing y, I'm going to write 27. So I've got 27 equals k times by x, but we know that x is 9 at the same time, isn't it? Okay, cool. Well, I'm going to rearrange that to write it as 27 is equal to 9k, isn't it? We always put the number in front of the letter. Now, to find k, do you see how now my equation, I only have k left? That's perfect, because when we're solving an equation, we can only have one letter, can't we? We've got k, that's it, perfect. This is just algebra. I just need to solve this equation, don't I? So normally with algebra, to solve it, I want to get like k equals. Well, currently I have 9k, not 1k, right? So how do I get from 9k to just 1k? I would have to divide by 9, wouldn't I? And because it's an equation, we have to do it on both sides. So I'm just going to bring it over here. Obviously, On the right, 9k divided by 9 is just k, and 27 divided by 9 is 3. Perfect. So now we know that k is 3. Now, before I jump on to the next step, I don't like to get ahead of myself. I kind of write this little therefore symbol. I'm going to rewrite my formula, but instead of k, I can write down the number 3, can't I? So my actual formula is y equals 3x. Perfect. So that is my proper formula. So you're going to do this for every question. Now that we have our actual formula, we can actually do step 3, which is what I like to call answer the question, right? Actually do what the question is saying. In this case, it's saying complete the table. Okay, cool. Well, let's look at our column on the left here, the first column. We've been given y is 15. We need to find out what x is. So I know my formula is y equals 3x. So we're just doing more substitution, aren't we? So I'm going to put like part A here. And this one here is part B, isn't it? So part A, I know that y is 15, so I can replace the y with 15 equals 3x. Again, I'm just solving that equation, aren't I? I just want to find out what is x. So I have to divide by 3 on both sides to get 1x. So that's x, and 15 divided by 3 is 5. Perfect. So that is 5. And B, same again, except you see how now we've been given x. Okay, we've been given x as 13. We need to find out y. So when I use this formula, I don't know what y is. So I've still got y equals, and then 3 times by x, but x is 13. So that's what I'm going to substitute in. This one doesn't need any rearranging, does it? All I need to do is literally just do what is 3 times 13, which I know is 39. There's my answer. Okay, so every question you're going to follow these 3 steps. Number 1, what is my formula? Number 2, I need to find k using a matching pair that they have to give you. And number 3, answer the question, whether that's just one question or like this was kind of like 2 parts, wasn't it? Just depends. So let's go through this one. The next one has been written differently. We don't have a table anymore. However, you can see the 3 sentences in the question actually line up with the 3 steps that we're going to take, which is really good. So y is directly proportional to x. When y is 4, x is 8. And the question is, find the value of x when y is 17. Okay, cool. So step 1 lines up with this one, doesn't it? Y is directly proportional to x. That means, what is my formula? Well, as we said from the first page, if it's directly proportional, we've got y equals k x. Y equals k times x. Step 2 is we're going to use our matching pair, so we've got y is 4, x is 8, to find the value of k. So I'm going to take my formula and I'm going to substitute in both of these values. So where it says y, I'm going to put 4, and where it says x, I'm going to put 8. Again, that's kind of just like writing 8k, isn't it? And then I just have to solve this equation, right? So I'm going to have to divide across by 8 because I just want k on its own. So k equals 4 divided by 8, which is a half. The k value is going to be different for every single question, okay? And before I get on to my step 3, I'm going to write a little therefore up here. Therefore, I'm going to rewrite my formula, but instead of writing k, I'm going to write the actual number. So I know therefore y equals a half x, or x over 2 if you prefer to write it that way. So that's my actual formula. That's like the relationship, isn't it? That's like the relationship, isn't it? We were saying proportion is saying that they have a relationship. Y and x have a relationship. In this case, it's telling us that the relationship is that y is basically half of x. So step 3, answer the actual question. As you can see, that's our 3rd sentence here. Find the value of x when y is 17. Okay, we're back to substituting. I'm going to use this formula. I know that y is 17, so instead of y, I'm putting 17 equals a half x. And now I just need to solve this equation. Now, if you've written it like this, 1/2 times x, well, that means I just have to divide by a half, doesn't it? You might have written it differently though. You might have written it as y equals x over 2, which is fine, in which case you're going to just multiply by 2, aren't you? Dividing by a half is the exact same as timesing by 2, so it doesn't really matter which of these you're going to use. So 17 divided by half is just double 17, which is 34. So there's our answer. It's literally just these 3 steps. So you have to just remember the 2 formulas, one for direct proportion, one for inverse proportion, and remember these 3 steps. Actually, the steps are the same for inverse proportion. Obviously, the only difference is you're going to start off with the other formula. But as I said, we'll get to that in the other video. So if you feel comfortable with the steps and the formula, and if you're already really happy with algebra anyway, feel free to give this one a go yourselves, pause the video and then check your answers. Our first 2 questions were quite straightforward. It was just y is directly proportional to x, wasn't it? Do you see here how it's slightly different? You have to be really careful, read the question properly, because it says y is directly proportional to x squared, okay, not just x. Sometimes this second letter might not just be the letter on its own, it might be squared, cubed, square root, could be anything, okay? When y is 90, x is 6, that's our matching pair again. Find the value of y when x is 2. We're still going to follow the same 3 steps, okay? Step 1, we said, was the formula, wasn't it? Y is directly proportional to x squared. So we know that the normal formula is y equals kx, but we don't have just x anymore, do we? We have x squared. So include that when you're writing down your formula. Okay, step 2 is find k. Now it's all the same. I'm going to substitute in my matching pair. So y is 90, and we've got k times x squared. Now in this case, it's therefore going to be 6 squared, not just 6. So to solve this, I'm going to do what is 6 squared? Well, that's obviously 36. I can write it as obviously 36k in that case. And then all I have to do to get k is divide across by 36, isn't it? So 90 divided by 36 is 2.5. You might prefer to keep it as a fraction, which is 5 over 2. Really doesn't matter, it's up to you. Okay, then I'm going to write my therefore. What is my actual formula? What is my actual relationship between y and x squared? Well, that's y equals 2.5 x squared, isn't it? Or as I said, you might write it as y equals 5 over 2. X squared, same thing, doesn't matter. Okay, now we can go on to step 3, which was to answer the question. We've got here, find the value of y when x is 2. So just really double check that you read the question properly as well here, because sometimes they swap between giving you y and then giving you x, and they're having to find whichever one of the letters. This time we've been given x. So I've got y equals 2.5 times by 2 squared. Okay, well 2 squared is 4, isn't it? 2.5 times 4 is 10. There we go, y is 10. That one I don't have to rearrange because the y is already the subject of the equation, isn't it? It's already on its own. So I just had to work out 2.5 times 2 squared. There's your answer. So we've still got the same steps even though it's an x squared, okay? Just remember to add that in at the start. Alright, so here you can see we've got some fractions now. This is how they could make it a little bit harder, I guess. Maybe if it's a non-calculator question, they might chuck in a few fractions. Not really to do with making proportion harder, but just checking that you know how to deal with fractions, right, without a calculator. So we're running through the same 3 steps. Step 1, formula. Y is directly proportional to the root of x, or to the square root of x. Okay, well I know it's y equals kx, but it's now k square root x, isn't it? Just copy whatever this is. Step 2, use my matching pair to find the value of k. Okay, so I'm going to substitute in y is 3 over 2, k, and then square root of x, which is 25. Alright, so what is the square root of 25? If it's a non-calculator question, they're obviously going to give you a square number, right? They can't get you to square root something that you don't know the square root of, okay? So obviously the square root of 25 is 5, so that's actually 5k, isn't it, on that side? And same as before, I need to divide by 5. So make sure you're happy with doing 3 over 2 divided by 5, okay? You might prefer to convert it into a decimal. I prefer to keep things as fractions. But 3 over 2 divided by 5. Basically, if we're going to divide by a whole number, that means we're just going to be timesing the denominator by that number. So that actually becomes 3 over 10, because 2 times 5 is 10, isn't it? Again, that's not really related too much to direct proportion. That's just basically fractions. Okay, so we know what k is. We want to write our little therefore. What is my actual formula for this particular question? Well, y equals k, which is actually 3 over 10, square root x. That's actually my formula, isn't it? You might want to put it as 0.3 if you want, but I'm going to leave it as a fraction in this case. Okay, step 3, answer the question. So, find the value of x when y is 12 over 5. So now we've been given y. So I'm going to put 12 over 5 equals 3 over 10 square root x. Okay, now we just have to rearrange this to solve for x. Back to just algebra now, isn't it? I'm going to divide by 3 over 10 because technically this is a multiplier here, isn't it? So again, this is really testing. Are you happy with dividing fractions? Just as a hint, remember to divide fractions, we use the KFC, keep, flip, change. So if I just write it over here, 12 over 5 divided by 3 over 10, keep, flip, change, we've got keep, flip, and change. Okay, and then you just multiply across. So 12 times 10 is 120, over 5 times 3, which is 15, equals square root of x. Now, you might want to simplify that first because that does look like it was simplified, doesn't it? 120 over 15 is actually 8. Okay, now how do we reverse the square root? Because we want x as a whole. We don't want square root of x. Well, the opposite of the square root is squaring, isn't it? We're going to square both sides. I'll just put it here. So that you get x on the right, and then 8 squared is 64. There you go. X is 64. Okay, so hopefully by now you've got the idea. It's quite repetitive. The last 2 questions that we've got are now going to be worded questions. As you can see, it's not just y is directly proportional to x. We've got an actual scenario. However, you should be able to see that you can still break it down into those 3 steps in those 3 sentences. So the cost, which they're telling us to use the letter C for, of a hotel is directly proportional to the number of days, D, spent there. Okay, so we're using C and D this time. All of our previous examples were X and Y. However, as I said at the start, you could use any letters. It could be any letters in your questions, okay? So just be aware of that. It costs £250 to stay for 5 days. How much would it cost to spend 9 days in the hotel? Okay, we've still got the same exact 3 steps, haven't we? The first bit, which is the relationship. The second bit, which is our matching pair. And the third bit, which is the actual question. So step 1, we want our formula, don't we? As I said, if they use different letters, just write the formula in the same order as the letters appear. So for example here, C is first, isn't it? So I'm going to put C equals, still K, isn't it? Because it's always K for our constant. And then where it would normally be X is now just D. Okay, that's it. You just write it in the same order that you can see it in the sentence. Step 2, use our matching pair to work out the value of K. So in this case, the cost is 250. So I'm going to put 250 equals K times the number of days, which is 5. Again, we can swap that around to be 5K, can't we? And to solve to find K, we just need to divide by 5 on both sides. So 250 divided by 5 is just 50, isn't it? So in this particular question, K is 50. Going to do our little therefore, rewrite the formula, but with K as a number. So C equals 50D. What that's basically saying is the cost is equal to 50 times the number of days. So effectively what we're saying here is that it costs £50 a day, doesn't it? Okay, finally, step number 3, answer the actual question. How much would it cost to spend 9 days in the hotel? Well, that's 9 for D, isn't it? So C equals 50 times 9, which should give us 450. Okay, so the answer in this case, in the context, is £450. So you can see, even though it's a worded scenario context kind of question, I've still followed the exact same 3 steps. I just kind of have to decipher a little bit, figure out my starting point with my correct formula, but from there, it's the same thing, isn't it? Okay, this is our last question. It's another worded one, so pause the video, give it a go, follow the same 3 steps, and you should get the correct answer. So the average daily temperature, T, is directly proportional to the number of hours of sunlight, S. The daily temperature, 24 degrees, is when it has been sunny for 6 hours. How many hours of sunlight would there be if the daily temperature is 18 degrees? Okay, cool. We've got the same structure, haven't we? Step 1. What is my formula? Now again, they've given us letters. If they don't give you letters, like they might just write it as this, daily temperature, you just choose the letters. You might prefer to use T because it represents temperature, or you might just want to keep it X and Y. It's completely up to you. If they don't give you letters, just choose your own letters, okay? So the formula is T comes first because it came first in the sentence. Is directly proportional to the number of hours of sunlight, which is S, so T equals KS. Simple as that. Step 2. Use our matching pair to find the value of K, which is the 24 degrees and the 6 hours. So T is 24 and S is 6, isn't it? Again, just rewrite that as 6K. So to find K, I just need to divide both sides by 6. So 24 divided by 6 is 4, isn't it? So in this case, K is 4. So therefore, my actual formula is T equals 4S. Okay. Step 3, actually answer the question. How many hours of sunlight would there be if the daily temperature is 18 degrees? So T is 18 in this case, isn't it? So 18 equals 4S. I want to find out what S is, so I just need to divide by 4. So 18 divided by 4 is 4.5, or you might have it as 9/2, but that's effectively, in this context, 4.5 hours, isn't it, of sunlight. There we go. So that is your introduction into direct proportion. Just really make sure you remember the formula and the 3 steps. The next video you need to watch is on inverse proportion. If you found this one easy, inverse proportion should also be quite easy. It's just using a different formula, that's all. So thanks for watching this video. Leave down below any questions you might have, and don't forget to subscribe.